What if I told you that in the United States, you could once be arrested for wearing your natural hair, or for playing a drum, or for celebrating Christmas? This isn't dystopian fiction. This is real American history. And the most disturbing part? Some of it still exists today. Stick with this story because the ending will change the way you see the word freedom. Let's start with hair. In 1786, in Louisiana, black women were legally forced to hide their hair. They weren't criminals. They just looked too beautiful. Braids, beads, feathers, volume. White lawmakers felt threatened. So they passed the Tignon law requiring head wraps to downplay their beauty. But black women didn't comply quietly. They turned those wraps into towering statements. Bright silks, high knots, elegance weaponized. They took a law meant to erase them and used it to stand taller. And that's a pattern you're going to see again and again. Now imagine you're 7 years old. You've been taken from your family. Your braids are cut, your clothes burned, and the only thing you have left is your language. But you're told if you speak it, you'll be punished. That's what happened in US government-run Indian boarding schools. From the late 1800s to the 1970s, Native American children were stripped of their languages. Lakota, Diné, Ojibwe forced to speak only English. Some kids were beaten for saying their own names. Others had soap shoved in their mouths for singing tribal songs. One boy said, "I lost my words. I had them once. They were mine." By the 1970s, dozens of indigenous languages had nearly vanished, not because they faded, but because they were targeted. But some elders remembered. They whispered words in secret. They recorded songs late at night. They passed down knowledge, one child at a time. That whisper became survival. And it wasn't just language, even sound was banned. On southern plantations, African drums were outlawed. Slave owners feared them, because drums weren't just rhythm, they were messages, signals, codes, unity. A single beat could say, "Run tonight." So they made the drums illegal, but the rhythm refused to die. Enslaved Africans clapped, stomped, snapped bones, clicked spoons. They made music from silence. They taught their children how to listen between the notes. You can ban the instrument, but not the pulse behind it. Even joy was criminalized. In 1659, the Puritans of Massachusetts made Christmas illegal. Why? Because they believed it was sinful, decadent, Catholic, chaotic. Shops stayed open, churches stayed silent. If you celebrated, you were fined. For more than 20 years, the birth of Christ was considered a crime. And what makes that even stranger? Today, America calls itself the land of Christmas. The same thing happened with music. In the 1950s, America tried to ban rock and roll, not just because it was loud, not just because it was rebellious, but because it was integrated. White teenagers were dancing to black artists, so cities passed laws banning jungle music. Concerts were shut down. Radio DJs were fined. Some venues banned certain beats altogether. And yet, the music only got louder. Then in the 1980s, the panic returned. This time, it was metal. Parents burned records in church parking lots, AC/DC, Metallica, even Prince. Preachers claimed the songs had satanic messages hidden backward. TV segments warned of musical mind control. It became known as the Satanic Panic. But the more they burned, the more kids listened. Because when you try to outlaw rhythm, you only prove its power. That fear of expression showed up everywhere, even in school gyms. By the 2000s, schools across the country were banning twerking and grinding at dances. Some enforced no-contact zones. Others brought in chaperones with flashlights. One principal banned students from dancing unless they kept a Bible's width between their bodies. Proms were cancelled. Students were suspended. What were they really afraid of? Not the dance moves, but the fact that young people were expressing themselves, especially young women. Again and again, we see the same pattern. When a community embraces joy or power or pride, someone in charge calls it a threat, and suddenly it's illegal. Even fortune-telling was once criminalized. In early 20th century America, palm readers, tarot card readers, and psychics were arrested under anti-witchcraft laws. In many cities, the only way to give a reading legally was to call it entertainment. But behind those crystal balls were women, often immigrants, often outcasts, using stories to give others hope, guidance, and healing. And yet, they were treated as criminals. Their crime? Belief. The same thing happened to the peyote ceremony, a sacred native ritual involving a hallucinogenic cactus used for healing and spiritual connection. In 1918, it was banned nationwide. Police raided ceremonies. Elders were arrested. The ritual was forced underground for generations. Not until 1994 did it gain federal protection, and even now, it's only legal for federally recognized tribes. What gives one person the right to say how another can pray? And then there's the strangest of all, absinthe, a green liquor so feared it was banned in the US for 95 years. They said it caused hallucinations, violence, madness. In truth, it was just strong and misunderstood. Writers like Hemingway and artists like Van Gogh drank it for inspiration, but lawmakers outlawed it. Bars were raided, bottles destroyed. The drink only became legal again in 2007. Almost a full century of fear over a myth. Now here's the part I don't want you to miss. These weren't just random bans. They were calculated. They weren't about safety. They were about control. Hair was banned because it showed pride. Language was banned because it held memory. Drums were banned because they built connection. Music was banned because it made people move together. The goal wasn't to protect it, it was to erase. But every time something was banned, someone remembered. Someone whispered the words, played the rhythm, wore the hair, danced anyway. That's why this story matters. Because if it happened before, it can happen again. And knowing the past is the only way to protect what we still have left. So I'll ask you this. What part of your culture would you fight to protect? Subscribe to uncover more forbidden stories from America's past.